Hi artists, so the purpose of this video is to show you how to take simple shapes to make complex forms. So if we're talking about hands, what I want you to start to realize is within our own hand, there are lots of very simple shapes that you know how to draw that make this up, okay? So I'm going to flip it over because the lifelines on the back and the creases are a little bit easier to see what I'm talking about. So the palm of our hand is shaped pretty much like a rectangle, okay? Or rectangular prism because there's depth to our hand, okay? The spaces in between our knuckles are shaped like rectangles or cylinders, like, you know, a tube of chapstick, a can of soda, a bottle of water, because there is this depth to our hand. The hardest one to see is this. Artists say this is shaped like a cone. That's because of the way the bone is underneath your finger. The tip of the bone comes in like a cone on our hand. So they say the tips of our fingers are like cones. However, you could say cylinders again. You'll notice the cone shape because the bottom of our where our fingerprint is, it's a little bit more angled. Okay, so cone. So we have rectangles, we have cylinders, we have cones that make up our hand, those simple shapes that make a complex form. What I want you to do when you're drawing with simple shapes, you get to control the scale you're working on, okay? So I like to draw big, so I'm going to try and draw in, I'm going to draw in the palm of my hand in kind of that rectangular shape that we said existed, okay? You'll notice that I'm kind of curving the top and the bottom because in all honesty, that is what I see when I look at the palm of my hand. It has kind of a curve where my finger's attached and it kind of has a curve where the bottom of my hand is, okay? So what you have to remember, and I'm drawing this in just so you can see what I'm talking about, the height. So however tall this is, you have to draw your middle finger that same height. So it doesn't matter if you drew this really small, you would just see, you would kind of approximate and you go, oh, you know, it's that long, so my middle finger has to be this long, okay? So I'm going to draw this in, and then whatever height that is, I'm going to try and draw it in about the same height, okay? If you're a rulers person, by all means, bust out that ruler and you can do an exact measurement. It just makes the arch that you create for your hand, since your fingers are not all the same size, it makes it pretty realistic, okay? So now I have in the height here, and I've got to go through and draw in my markers, okay, for my pointer finger. And what I'm going to do first, I'm going to draw in an arch, okay? The arch is just designed to make sure I do not draw all my fingers at the same height. If I can draw in a nice rainbow, then at least I know that my hand will be read as a hand, because not everything will be the same height. So then I go through, and it's up to you. If you feel really uncomfortable making these judgment calls, contour drawing where you trace it is probably the way you should work for this assignment. However, if you feel pretty good about just drawing things in, I would say try shapes because it's actually pretty fun, okay? Now we know that our thumb is divided up with one knuckle and that each one of our other fingers has two. So what they say to do is just divide up evenly, okay? So in this one I know I have one knuckle, so I'm going to find halfway and I'm going to put a line. I'm going to go through and do the exact same thing in each one of these. And you're just going to try and make them as equal as you can, because the height differs on each one of these. The line should stagger, okay? And that's a good way to know if you're doing this correctly, okay? So then I'm going through and I'm just trying to divide them up. You'll notice that those lines kind of form a similar arc. So there's lots of little pointers that it's like you're doing it correctly, okay? So no stress. Also, now it's time to go through and start to add in those shapes that we talked about. So we said, or rather I said, that cylinders kind of make up all these spots in my hand. So I'm going to go through and start with a basic rectangle just to kind of get the shape formed, okay? So I'm going to use this center line as kind of like where the bone is, and I'm going to make sure I build up my shapes around it. You can extend out the line at this point to make the cylinders as large or as small as you want. You notice I made my thumb a little bit larger because, in all fairness, I mean, it is kind of large as it comes into the hand. Now, they say the top of our fingers are more like cones. So I'm going to take that shape, that triangle shape to start, and I'm going to extend it all the way to the line, and I'm going to lightly draw it back so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. However, we know that that thumb has girth to it. It's fairly chubby. So what I would do is I would take it out, and I would just round it back to touch, okay? So now I'm kind of getting that general shape. Now all I'm doing is going through and adding in those shapes. I notice that I'm gonna have to draw down a little bit. Try not to stress if you have to do something like that. It's just a judgment call. So I'm just going through and I'm going, yep, I have 2 rectangles that I said I had to make, or cylinder shapes, and then I have a cone shape. And if it's slightly off, don't worry. It's like, don't stress about it. Just go through and put it in to start. And then if you want to look at your own finger, you can determine how much extra you would put on, okay? These hands, when I draw them, they turn out a little bit more cartoon-like, but I don't necessarily hate it. So I don't want you guys to take digs at your artistic ability if your hand looks kind of cartoony. It'll come in how you shape the hand. So like if I went through and I kind of looked more at my own realistic hand, and realistic hand meaning the one that's actually attached to me, then I can go through and adjust the lines to make them look how I want them to. Right now I'm just placing them. You'll notice I'm keeping a gap in between the fingers because there is a slight gap in between those fingers. So I'm trying to put in features that would be realistic so that my hand reads as a real hand, okay? And then you'll notice that I have to get off that main line that I drew. Like it doesn't work anymore for me as I started to draw in fairly large. So don't stress, okay? It's like you're just making judgment calls and you're using these guiding principles. So you know that your hand is made up of those simple shapes. You're putting the simple shapes together. And then my hand is actually going to go off the page, and I'm just going to have to be okay with that, okay? All right, so now I have all these guidelines. It gets really confusing if you keep them all because then you're trying to draw in hard lines in these details. So what I tell students is I get rid of some of my guidelines, okay? So I go through and I just erase away the stick that I drew just to place the finger, and I start to erase away any hard lines that divide up the finger that doesn't actually exist. Like we do have creases that run through our fingers, which we identified in the last video, but they don't divide up our hands like little bitty pieces of sausage or Tootsie Rolls because it's kind of creepy and we look like a rag doll. So I get rid of those lines, and then that way I'm a little bit more free to add in the lines I want later, okay? So you'll see I drew super light so that I would have this opportunity to do it. I want to keep some evidence of the line so that I know where to add in my knuckles. Okay, now I have a shape that I can work with. I'm going to go ahead and extend this line down to start. Actually, it's the opposite way. When I look at my hand, this line kind of extends in. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that right now, kind of make it look a little bit more realistic. Okay, so now I have my hand. I'm going to go through and start adding in my markers. You can look at a copy of a hand or you can look at your own hand, but try and use what you see, not what you think you see. So like the thumb is on an angle, so my nail would only be seen at an angle. And then I would start to draw in a nail. This has that little white mark there. Can never remember what it's called. My skin is kind of puckered around, and it comes down and off that, and then it comes into my knuckle. And I do have these really masculine marks in my finger. I have no idea, but all my female students were always like, your hands look so manly, and I was like, I guess they do. This is where I want you to start to shape. Like my hand really doesn't look like that. That's very bulbous. So then I might start smoothing it out. This looks more like a thumb to me. Those markers were perfect to start, but now I have this where I'm like, okay, I actually like that a lot more, and then my thumb comes out. Okay, so now I'm starting to change those lines from hard or from soft to hard. All right, so I'm done with my thumb. Now, you don't have to keep referencing the hand to do this type of drawing. What you do want to do is keep in mind you're using curved lines or ellipses to build up your nail beds. You know, a guiding principle is that they always go from large to small, they narrow down. That's a little exaggerated for my own finger. So maybe if I want to make it look more realistic, I bend that down and then I bend it in. And I like that a lot better. And then you start to go through. Now you already know where all your knuckle placements are. So you just stick with this rule, okay? So since this one is kind of more freeing, like you don't have to trace your own hand, what I want you to consider is if this really bores you to tears, your goal is to try and put on 3 to 4 lines per knuckle, okay? If you do one, it looks really empty and kind of vague. Like, I mean, people will know that it's a knuckle, but it's not going to be as strong as it could. And if you put in too many, you're going to age yourself. So you're going to look way older than you actually are. So my goal every time I do a knuckle is to add in some of the hard lines that I actually see. Okay, you can use different pressures. So if you notice that some are thicker than others, put them in deeper or heavier. But your goal is to definitely put in at least 3 lines. Guiding principle, at least 3 lines every time. And then I'm just going to go through, and I'm trying to look back down at my other hand because I noticed that I was making my nails look not quite like my own nails. I mean, they read as nails because I'm using the ellipses, so these curved lines as opposed to just drawing a big square or a big rectangle. I'm also going to start to go in and reshape my hand because like I'm noticing that my hand isn't shaped like an oval up on top of this finger. So then I'm going to kind of drag it back down more like my finger would be. And then I'm going to go and add in at least 3 lines that make up this knuckle. Okay. And then you can go through and start changing hard line or soft lines to hard lines. Okay. But kind of look for those markers, okay? I said my pinky was going to have to go off the page, so then I have to kind of play with that shape, knowing that I'm not going to see the whole pinky. And then add in, I've got small nails on all of them that are kind of growing. And then I'm going to go through. There's something that looks odd about my pinky this way. And sometimes if I draw out the hard lines, I'm able to kind of figure out why it looks weird. But I think it's just because it's so straight or it's too long. But because it has a general form, that's okay. I'm just going to stick with it, okay? That's kind of where I'm at with you as artists. I don't want you to beat yourselves up about how you're drawing your hand. I just want you to try it, okay? So I've got these hard marks. Some hard. I'm going to start to go through and just do some reshaping of the hand so I can kind of figure out the form and if I like it or don't like it. And then where the lines would come in. So like I do have some skin that's in between my fingers. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in. And then I'm just going to put in some knuckle lines really quick. I'm going to put in some of those lines just to make sure my placement's there. But what you're looking at now is a hand that looks pretty realistic. There's cartoony elements to it. I think my most successful is my thumb. But when I do placement, the reason my drawing's kind of off is because my pinky's too long. So I have to work on that moving forward. But as long as you can remember, distance here is the same distance here, and then get your arc in there, you'll have a pretty successful time every time. And then you get to play more with scale.